Hi, my name is Adriana Zakev, and I'm the CEO of Circular Economy Asia. To learn more about my organisation, please visit my website at circulareconomyasia.org. Now, the purpose of this video is to introduce you to the concept of the development of a secondary raw materials industry. Because how do we intend to meet our biodiversity commitments? We all know that maintaining biodiversity is critical for all life on this planet, but meeting these commitments is proving easier said than done. How do we intend to meet our climate change commitments? In 2015, 196 countries signed up to the Paris Agreement on climate change, and we are not on track to meet these commitments either. Finally, how do we intend to future-proof our economies? Our globalised world is complex and highly interconnected, and it's critical for economies to keep functioning in the challenging times ahead. We'll be exploring these questions within the context of resource management, or more specifically, what we think of as waste are really the resources of the future. But first of all, a little bit of background. All the products that we use are made from what we call primary raw materials. And these primary raw materials go into all the products that we use on a daily basis. And at the end of the use cycle, these products end up in landfill or incineration. Now, I'm not here to talk about the linear economy, only to highlight the incredible inefficiency of the use of our primary resources. And to bring to your attention, the products that we use and discard can be turned into what we call secondary raw materials for reuse by manufacturers in new products. In order to establish a resource-efficient economy, we need to transition to resource recovery to develop a secondary raw materials industry. Now, I'm sure you're going to say, but hey, Adriana, isn't this recycling? And the answer is no. Recycling is an action, usually around the environmental narrative. Waste as a resource is an outcome, requiring a strategy to fit an economically viable circular system. So I'm asking you to go that one step further past the action of recycling. Every time that you discard a product into a recycling bin, you need to ask yourself two things. Can this product be reprocessed? And if it can, it should be segregated from other materials, and it should be as least contaminated as possible, so we maintain the integrity and the quality of the material. Now, a great example of the value of reprocessing, we can use copper. And the recycling of copper uses up to 85% less energy than primary production. And this is indicative of many other materials that we reprocess. It uses less energy. But I have to say, the reprocessing of recyclable resources is still not a perfect system, and this is particularly true for textiles and plastics. So how important are secondary raw materials? Well, to answer that question, we're going to look into critical raw materials, or rather rare earth elements. Now, critical raw materials are used in key technologies, and as you can see from this graph, there's quite a number of critical raw materials. But we're not going to look into all of them, just two. These two, what's called light rare earth elements and heavy rare earth elements. Now, according to Mining Weekly in 2020, there's going to be astronomical demand growth for certain rare earth minerals in the 2030s, and the supply side of the industry is unlikely to keep up with the growing demand. If the global industry continues to operate myopically, the rate of demand growth would soon reach escape velocity, where demand growth is so great it is simply implausible for the already lagging supply side to catch up and keep up. So how is waste as a resource a solution? Well, increased amounts of rare earth elements reprocessing will contribute to overcoming some of the critical issues of overwhelming demand. It'll increase security of supply because we won't be using rare earth elements from countries across the other side of the world, which means also shorter supply chains and less CO2 emissions. We'll also be addressing what's called the balance problem. Now, what this means is that rare earth elements don't come individually in specific ores, not like zinc or copper or iron ore or gold or silver. They come mixed. So you end up with mines that can overproduce lower demand rare earth elements and still be unable to meet supply for higher demand rare earth elements. And by not mining, we're not threatening biodiversity. Now, historically, China has had a rare earth monopoly, but the largest known deposits of rare earths. But Brazil, Vietnam and Russia also have a lot of largely untapped potential in this sector. The United States and Australia ramped up production of rare earths after 2010, and most recently Myanmar and Madagascar started to mine considerable amounts. But rare earths are not the only minerals that are contributing to our green technological future. Nickel and copper have soared. Nickel traditionally hovers between $8,000 and $15,000 a tonne, is now at $20,000 a tonne. Copper hovers between $2 to $3 a pound, is now hitting highs of $4 a pound. Price of iron ore, historically, has fluctuated between $60 and $120 per tonne, is now more than $160 per tonne. Now, the next 30 years are likely to bring a super cycle of investments in clean energy infrastructure, clean transportation, and everything else that is required to make the green transition possible. And ironically, it's all happening through mining. So really we are maintaining a business as usual scenario in order to meet our green future. But it's important to stress that mining isn't the bad guy here. This same scenario is being played out for many primary raw materials, despite the associated costs and risks. The facts clearly show how using secondary raw materials can reduce CO2 emissions, reduce supply risk and price volatility, create jobs, new businesses, and preserves biodiversity. Here in Asia, we are one of the most inefficient regions in the world, using more than 50% of the resources for consumption, while only producing 32% of world economic output. In 2018, a small social enterprise called Circle Economy, based in the Netherlands, produced the first circularity gap report. And in there it stated that the world is 9.1% of recovered resources that goes back into the system. In 2021, Circle Economy published the latest circularity gap report, where they said that 8.6% of recovered resources goes back into the system. So this clearly shows that we are continuing to use more primary raw materials for our increased demands, but we are reprocessing less. Now, the development of a secondary raw materials industry is not a simple process. There's a lot of moving parts. For example, we must significantly improve collection systems. We have to build a culture of proper disposal behaviours in order to improve the quality of recyclable resources. We also have to build the business case for reprocessing facilities to get investment and entrepreneurs interested in the secondary raw materials industry. We have to create standards for secondary raw materials in order for manufacturers to use secondary raw materials for manufacturing. And we have to improve our forecasting of raw materials used by manufacturers. Now, we're never going to reach an equilibrium. There's never going to be a time where our secondary raw materials industry is going to meet total demand. There is always going to be a shortfall, and this shortfall will always be covered by primary raw materials. But we know that the demand side of our future world is not being met by the supply side of primary raw materials. And investment can play a big part in balancing out between primary raw materials and secondary raw materials. If the 2020s is going to be the decade of action for the Sustainable Development Goals, it's also going to be the decade of competing forces. We already are still maintaining a business as usual scenario, and these competing forces will continue to play out throughout the coming decade. We have to move on from the inconvenient truth that a secondary raw materials industry is vital for us to continue with the lifestyle and the future that we aspire to. And we have to put aside the reassuring lie that we can maintain a business as usual situation. Now, I'm not really here to convince you that waste as a resource and secondary raw materials is important. I want you to do the math. I want you to understand the reduction of CO2 emissions through the development and the reprocessing of secondary raw materials, how it creates more jobs and increases skills training than primary raw material production. We establish more new businesses because they're localised. We're not shipping primary raw materials from around the world, but it's all collected locally and reprocessed locally. And these are the new businesses of the future. And this leads us to shorten supply chains, reducing supply chain risk. It also means we can keep our biodiversity commitments. So this is what industrial parks look like across Asia. This is in India. And we can revitalise and rejuvenate in light industrial areas. Because if you've travelled anywhere around the world and visited light industrial areas, you will see that there's an incredible amount of underutilised space. And it's this underutilised space that could actually be used for the development of secondary raw materials. We don't need to clear more land. We don't need to make these huge industrial parks. We don't need to make reprocessing plants. we can do it locally and we can rejuvenate urban environments. This is what a rejuvenated urban environment looks like. And another image of what we can do to our decaying urban environments, industrial areas. This is an eco-park from Morocco that can also be the foundations for reprocessing facilities if we have the right urban planning. So my question to you is, what's your choice? The continued use of primary raw materials or the development of a secondary raw materials industry? Now, on a practical side, my organisation's work is focused on resource efficiency, resource management, and the development of a secondary raw materials industry. I've even created a small brochure, and you can contact me to learn more. My organisation also delivers skills training, sustainability, free and paid online and offline. We have a fantastic knowledge centre, and you can contact me socially through all the social media channels. Thank you.